All right, we should be ready to go.
Okay, here we go. I call to order this March 24th, 2022 meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission at 6:03 p.m. In attendance, we have staff Corey Shirtleff, Jessica Thacker, City Council Liaison Luke Wojciechowski, and Planning Commissioners myself, Kaya Marienfeld, Jessica O'Leary, Ruben Villapando Salas, Jeremy Lynch, and Jill Tatton. Thank you all for coming, and thanks to members of the public who are watching on YouTube and waiting in the waiting room. This is our very last Zoom meeting for the foreseeable future. We will resume in-person meetings starting next week and then continuing on for hopefully a long, long time. So thanks to everyone for being patient with doing things digital. We hope it provided a new way to access meetings for some folks, but we realize it was difficult for a lot of people. So thank you. Okay, first item on the agenda is citizens to be heard. So this will be citizens to be heard, not about items on the agenda tonight. So if you are here for the public hearing about the proposed ordinance to amend the R3 and R4 zones with the active household requirement, there is a later time for you to speak if you're here for that public hearing. I imagine we'll have to say this again if people aren't watching on YouTube when we let them in from the waiting room. So,
We have
yeah.
3 folks. I'll let them all in. We'll get the poll. My guess is by the names, they're all here for the public hearing, but then we'll put them back in the waiting room. So
Great.
let's bring them in now.
I can explain that again, Corey, if you want.
Once we, I think, have, okay, everyone should be on. So Emily, Caitlin, and Zoe, if you can hear us, we're just coming into citizens to be heard. So Kaya has her update about when we would prefer folks to speak.
Yeah, so if any of you are here to speak for citizens to be heard, which would be agenda items, items that are not on the agenda, so not the public hearing for tonight, now is your time to speak. But if you're here for the public hearing, we'll get to that shortly, and we can maybe just mute yourselves and we can call on you as we go. Is that okay, Corey, or do they need to go back to the waiting room?
No, I think that's appropriate. We'll have you maybe just have you muted and then turn your video off, and that will remove you from the active chat. So so Caitlin and Emily have removed their videos. Zoe, do you have a comment for citizens to be heard, or are you for the public hearing?
She may not be able to.
Okay.
There we go. This is I think I have the email up in front of me. I think I'm here for agenda item 4.1. Is that right, Kaya?
I believe so, yeah.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Cool.
Thanks,
So we'll tell you when the time is. It won't be long.
Cool.
Yeah, Corey, I do want to flag that as of now, we have not gotten any emails except one for the public hearing, but I do know many people who either sent an email to the Planning Commission address or use the Google form that's available on the city's website to provide comment, but none of the commissioners have seen those yet. Can we figure out how to change that? I really like having access to those before the meeting, but I realize that's in Summers Court, right?
Right. The auto directs for those forums, so the bit.ly and those type of forums go directly to the recorder's office and then are dispersed beyond that. So the council will certainly see them because we've mostly gotten them today, but they haven't been redirected to the Planning Commission here. So we do have them recorded. There's one that was sent directly to us that's been shared with the council and the Planning Commission. So don't feel like that those items aren't being heard, but it may not be that we have access to them for this particular meeting or in advance of this meeting, but we'll get those to the Planning Commission. And again, today is the public hearing. So with the Planning Commission next Tuesday at a special meeting, we'll be reviewing this item for recommendation. So there is another chance to both be heard and also submit comments for the Planning Commission to factor into their recommendation. So we still have time. We'll go over that in the timeline a bit further as well.
And if we don't get access to those emailed and form submitted comments by the end of the meeting tonight, just for folks watching or participating in the meeting, we will make sure to mention all of them at our next meeting on Tuesday. We have a special meeting about this same exact agenda item. I always like to mention and summarize the comments that we get, written comments, just because I think it's important that it's all for folks who are listening or watching and for the recording. So we'll make sure that that happens at our next meeting if it doesn't happen tonight. Okay, so it seems like we don't have anyone here for citizens to be heard by itself. So we can go ahead and proceed into the public hearing. Should I open the public hearing and then you give a summary, or do we want to do it the other way around, Corey? Oop, you're muted.
Let's approve the minutes really fast.
Oh, I missed that. So sorry.
But then we'll, I think, open the public hearing. In the past, we've done it both ways. So whatever I think you're comfortable with would be appropriate.
Cool. Great. Apologies. I skipped item number 3.1, which is just approval of the minutes from our planning commission meeting on March 10th, our last meeting. So if any commissioners would like to make a motion to approve, amend, anything like that, we can hear that now and get that done.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from March 10th, 2020.
I can second that.
And we have a motion by Jesso, a second by Ruben. Roll call vote whenever you're ready, Corey.
Perfect. Give me just a moment to get the recording down.
Yeah, you're good. You're trying to do everything tonight, I realize.
Right. Jessica is going to be taking charge of a lot of this at the next meeting, so that should be pretty fun. Jessica involved a little bit. All right. Ready to go. Jill.
Aye.
Jeremy.
Aye.
Jesso.
Aye.
Ruben.
Aye.
Kaya.
Aye.
Thank you. That concludes the vote 5-0.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Okay. Now we're on to agenda item number 4, which is the public hearing. So I'm probably going to have Corey give a summary first, and then we will officially open the public hearing just to give folks a little bit more time to kind of come into the waiting room if they're here for that, things like that. So those of you that are already let into the Zoom, hang tight. We'll get to you in just a minute, but Corey will just give some background and updates on where we are tonight on this ordinance.
Perfect. Thank you. Sure, I have the documents open here. In advance of this meeting, the Planning Commission has been sent the most updated, and this whole process has been a rolling draft, utilizing our consultant's time. So because of noticing requirements, we've typically been about a week behind that we notice you in advance with what the materials were at the time, and then they evolve continually, both by city council involvement and then our consultants. So what you'd received today was the most updated and what we're going to be calling our final draft. Again, it's still a draft, but it is our final draft as far as staff consulting goes. So amendments, of course, are going to be able to be made. The red lines are being considered. So you've been shared, I think, should have had a clean version of the ordinance and the red line. So we can see what amendments, if we want to remove or discuss some of those red lines or maintain them. But prior to walking through the ordinance, I'm going to give just a real brief overview again. As we've been moving through this ordinance process, it has really been a building understanding of what this ordinance is from the very beginning, being a very simple additional line of a use parameter to our R3 and R4 zones. But the context is really the heavy weight of how we got to that use parameter, both in the percentage and in the framework. So while this is going to be a brief presentation, it's because in essence, it's a very simple idea that just had to have a lot of substance and work go behind it. So if there's any questions, don't feel bad about being confused on how we got there or what the understandings are. We do have Nate Mitchell, our legal consulting attorney from Snow Christensen Martineau available to answer questions as well. But we'll go ahead and commence here. Brief overview of what we're hopefully discussing as a part of and following the public hearing would be our ordinance and public engagement timeline, how we are moving through that and where we are nearing the end of this. The ordinance final draft content, what the red line is actually composed of, a brief overview of the data and formula overview. The big presentation of this formula overview was really held at council on Tuesday. So our ability to retain the consultant, Aaron, for a double presentation didn't make sense for us. So we have the presentation, the information of him walking us through to where the number's at, and then it's for the planning commission to move that forward. So the understanding has kind of been pre-established, but then of course Nate available as all the way up to the end. Will probably retain Nate or Rob Keller in some capacity to into the end address any legal questions. Getting into the calendar timeline, this has been something that a lot of folks have asked questions on as far as the unique staging of this and why we're doing it the way we are, or that if there's a special comment period, what is that? How are we noticing that? But to jump a little bit further down in the timeline, we're down here on March 24th, currently activating our public hearing, and then we'll be a planning commission workshop with really a redundant special comment period. So we have had this open to the fact that when the citizens to be heard section is closed, we're opening a public hearing. And when the public hearing is closed and we're still within the item, we would allow citizens to pop in and comment during that item. So we're trying to give as much breadth of opportunity for comments from citizens as there can be. Moving into next week, we're doing a little bit of a flip-flop where the planning commission is going to meet on Tuesday, March 29th, to advance a recommendation, whether that's a positive or negative recommendation to the city council, along with that additional special public comment period. So again, citizens that are listening or have submitted comments, there will be more time if you're unable to make it tonight. Then finally, hopefully Thursday, March 31st, the city council will have a special meeting to approve the final ordinance draft. Again, an opportunity for special comment period has been noticed for them. Both of those agenda packets will be sent out tomorrow because we didn't want to send anything out in advance of the public hearing until we know what the draft coming away from this meeting is going to officially look like. So we are, again, moving very in line with what the discussions are. We're not really preemptively able to get there. That being said, we have budgeted some time following that 31st for special meetings for city council to approve before we get to our pending ordinance doctrine closure date. So if we exceed April 10th, this ordinance, as far as that resolution 33/2021 will lapse. We'll no longer be able to apply this to any of the projects that have been submitted in the middle of that resolution period. To comment on that, the planning commission has conditionally approved the Lost Springs Apartments as a site plan approval. That was conditionally approved under the compliance with this ordinance, whatever the resulting number might be, because it's an apartment. And, you know, to, I think, hopefully closely quote the applicant, it could have been 100%. It doesn't matter for them. They were planning to do employee or local housing throughout the project anyway. So they were moving forward. There were two other projects associated in this time frame. One was a fourplex and one was a 24-unit townhome development. Speaking with the applicant, I think was yesterday, and understanding this new number, I called him basically right after this percentage was completed and we were able to get the formulation data to that point. He has determined that they are comfortable with that and will be moving forward with this plan. So that's all of the plans that we have currently submitted are currently accepting of this ordinance and wanting to move forward with it in this structure, which I think is an important note here. All right, breaking down a little bit into the ordinance framework. This is something you've seen before, but really what we're basically doing, what the ordinance, the long structure in the actual exhibit is doing. One is that adjustment to the definitions section, amending the active employment household section, and then adding our active employment unit definition, amending the sections in the R3. This has been sticking around. This is still supposed to be R4, manufactured housing residential zone. I apologize for that continued typo there. And then the last inclusion, which is the larger one, which is the added chapter 1764, exclusively outlining the parameters of that active employment households requirement. Within that chapter, again, we're identifying a purpose section, general standards, submittal requirements and criteria, review procedures, and enforcement. Enforcement's been heavily edited since I think maybe last we spoke. We had, I think, been aware of that happening, but we've actually gone through the process of editing that. Before we get down into the ordinance itself, these were questions outstanding from the public of how these work. There's also been a frequently asked questions. Sorry, we might have a additional planning commissioner here. Okay, no, we don't. That's all right. All right. The questions being asked by the public, trying to create that transparency of when this applies, how this applies. So this has been profiled in that frequently asked questions report, which is up on the website. So any citizens listening that maybe have seen the drafts ordinance, but don't have a super clear understanding, on the website under planning and zoning page, there's a link which elaborates on the summary, the rationale behind the whole process, where we initiated this process, and some of the frequently asked questions that are about active employment household and what that term means. But as far as the conforming active unit, what we're talking about, these were questions about who can occupy those. And it's basically those concentric circles of it must be somebody that qualifies as an active employment household. So there were questions of, well, if it's rented for, well, we go down to here, 9 months out of the year by somebody that's active employment household, can somebody that's not active employment household occupy it for the remaining 3 months? The answer is no. It must always be an active employment household. It must be a minimum of 90 days, and it must be a minimum of 90-day consecutive, and a minimum of 9 months total per calendar year. And though that 9 months does not have to be consecutive or held by the same tenants. So it's what that's doing is ensuring that it's occupied a majority of the year, and there's buffer in there as you're turning over from different tenants potentially. This is a new included slide as we're moving forward with this new and official percentage of 42.5%, scaling what that means for a project. So just a quick reference guide if anybody's thinking about, oh, I'm going to do a project of 8 units. That 42.5 comes out to a 3.4, yielding a 3-unit requirement. So where we're at with this 42.5, and then the way in which we are organizing the rounding, how that works as the percentage breakdown into multiple decimal points, is you'll see, here's a good example, a 12.7. The way it's currently drafted is that it's rounding down to the whole number. So 12.1 through 9 is going to be 12 units. The reason we're doing that is to better manage the jumps as these decimals are going to be breaking down even further. So this is a compatible way with in which to review within our code, but it is a change from what the earlier ordinance might have been, and you'll see that in the red line. So with that being said, do I have any questions right now from anybody before we jump into, let me exit the screen here. Do we have any questions from Planning Commission at this point? We'll save the public just yet.
That 0.5 rounding up, that was in the last paper that you just sent to us, right? Like today.
Correct. The previous
got it,
rendition
yeah.
was 0.5, and then it separates there, round down, round up. And that has been amended following discussions with council and administration to nearest whole rounding down to it. So when it breaks the threshold of the next whole number is when it goes to that upper end number. So good question, good observations. Let's go ahead and break into that red line really quick. I know this is a lot, but this is kind of the important time to really go through everything, make sure everyone's aware.
Yeah, so if you're just tuning in, members of the public and the folks that are here with us on Zoom, thank you for your patience. We're just getting through kind of a summary about what the item is, and then we will open the public hearing and it'll be time for you to speak. So thank you for hanging in there. We should almost be done.
With the size of this font, is this legible, readable for everybody at this size? Okay. So with this red line draft, it's going to really help be able to quickly help us identify what little changes are being made. The major change here, of course, is identifying this official number. We're maintaining a continued language throughout, as affordability is often associated with a regulatory affordable housing component. That's really not what we're attempting to apply here. What we're attempting to maintain is attainable housing, meaning local free market. That we're not putting a regulation on how much, just that it must be attainable for those people that live within the area. Within the whereas clauses, and there's some major breaks in this draft. I've consolidated it better, but this is the actual live acting draft. So we're going to see these big gaps in the document is the way that word program works. Where we've added this here is really to highlight and identify why we're picking the R3 and R4 and why we're picking multi-household as the mechanism to carry this particular tool. Both of those being the zones and being the use, the reason we've determined those is first that they were the most susceptible to what we're calling this inverse development of a decrease of attainable housing and an increase of unattainable housing. So within that use and in these zones, we were seeing that at in more intense rate. And in addition to that, the tool to fix this issue is that multi-household tool. So it's perfect that it happens that these are the most susceptible areas, but they're also the best mechanisms in which to best and most accurately address this issue. So we're not trying to spread the issue around or encumber other zones or other uses that really aren't dealing with this explicit problem. We're focusing on this problem in these areas and with a tool that best addresses those. Some of these red lines have maintained from previous drafts as well. So I'm really just trying to highlight what the Planning Commission has not seen yet. These were some amendments made by a council member, Kaylin Jones, really cleaning up language that went through with the accessory dwelling unit, the ADU ordinance, that may have been missing. Just a little bit of change of language, which makes the ordinance and the definitions a little bit stronger. That was out of the definition section, now going into the individual zones, looking at adjusting kind of some language here, again, added by Kaylin Jones, just to better address what should be in the council's opinion happening in this zone. Again, bringing in that number. We've removed, interesting, those were supposed to, have been crossed out. So these have been removed. The red line just didn't make it all the way through, it looks like. So the only requirement for the households from 3 or more is this percentage requirement. And then it returned back to what was originally written, which was for developments of 7 or more, then incur this access and parking. So that was a discussion that we had really early on with the Planning Commission. It was just kind of more of a fix as we went scenario, and it was vocalized by council. They don't want to fix that right now. We'll address that separately and differently. So the included requirement in the zone is the only thing changing there. So we changed it and changed it back. This is the R4 zone. It should be identical in change format to that of the R3. So I'm scrolling through it quite quick. For anybody that hasn't read these before, they should be the same, and you'll have access to slow down and walk through these if you wish. Now we're getting into the new added chapter 1764 with that purpose, general, and criteria sections. So again, changing our number here. This is the rounding section that we just discussed. So this has been included where we're changing the results of a decimal of 0.5 to results in a decimal. The number of the required AUs shall be rounded down. This is really just content on changing language of free market units to a more specific terminology, which is non-active employment units, just to keep it very clear as to what we're trying to address. Percentage change. And this is that clarification on the 9 months, which do not need to be consecutive or held by the same occupant. We did also add this deed restricted component, clarifying. It's not anything that's really changed, but it's an area of language that wasn't explicit, and we've made it explicit. So this is actually a section that we can deliberate a little bit. It could be open because the idea is maintained within the ordinance, but we're just saying it outright, which sometimes helps. Sometimes it actually can conflate the issue further, but it reads, the deed restriction is for a designated active employment unit may be removed if the designated AEU is approved for redesignation within a qualifying unit through the standards that are applied above. What that means is this would really only apply in an apartment complex situation where the property owner maintains many units. When he gets his site plan, or she gets their site plan approval, they will designate certain units. So unit A, B, and C, and then units, D through whatever, M, are not. So with those units, as they have people housed in those, what likely will happen, and it again will probably, I believe, go back to the land use authority of which approved it, which could either be staff, planning commission, or city council based on the type of development. Redesignate those units based on who's actually living in them. So if they had 4 people that were active employment household units living in the 4 designated units, but then they had a 5th unit that they wanted to move somebody that was active employment in, they could redesignate one of those 4 in this other one, which would free up the other to be non-restricted. And this really, it's more of a condominium potential. I think apartments, it's redundant because everyone is typically renting, or would be, that's the definition, literally, is leasing or renting units in an apartment. So they will, all of those people very likely qualify. In a condominium, it could be a little bit different. So again, it's again, back to the discretion of the authority body that the redesignation would be appropriate. The reason we're saying this outright, as opposed to what was said in the deed restriction, which is in the occurrence that the MMC requires and regulates change regarding this restriction, a release of deed restriction signed by the city may remove this restriction. What we're saying there to developers is that you're not encumbered forever. You're only encumbered as long as the property remains intact as it is. And then the distribution of people, it maintains at least 42%, if not higher. But we're not at this point restricting how that looks. We want to allow some amount of freedom that it's not restricted forever because of the life change opportunities that might make this a problem for potential owners, if that makes sense. So let's revisit this at the end, but wanted to highlight that as a new addition that was going to be helpful for staff, but could be contrary dependent on where your thoughts are on that. Moving on, these are all similar changes as what had been seen earlier in the ordinance, just identifying what an active employment household qualification is. This was housed in the definitions area. We're repeating it twice because we want it very apparent in the main chapter, as well as definitions, what that type of household is. The biggest change is now in the enforcement section, which I think may have been shown in the previous submittal, but is essentially allowing us to maintain when and be explicit when these types of units will be in violation and when they're not compliant, to be very, very clear about that. But then when we get into the enforcement section, we've basically handed it over to our appropriate department in the city rather than the planning committee or the planning department verifying violation and enforcement. It goes to our code compliance department. So it's going to be processed through zoning violation penalties the way every other zoning violation does. The reason we included all this language to begin with is in the past, the city council has preferred that we become explicit with this. So this is actually a combination of development agreements that we've used in the past in our ADU enforcement section. But what we've done here by allowing our enforcement body to handle it the way that we're able to do that is there's language in here that conflicts that we actually don't have the mechanisms to enforce in the way it's saying that we should. So this is a really good administrative change that we've made here. Other than that, I believe that completes the edits of the red line.
Great.
Wow, I'm out of breath, so I'm going to stop sharing. And that really concludes, I think, my portion of the presentation. Nate Mitchell from Snow Christensen's available. If before we go to public hearing, we want to include Nate on any quick legal comments, but then maybe we'll retain Nate following the public hearing when we go into full discussion.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go ahead and do the public hearing right now, just because I know
Okay.
folks have been waiting around for a while and I want to be cognizant of their time. So planning commissioners will have lots of time for discussion and question and reflection on the comments we get during the public hearing, and the opportunity to ask Nate questions too. So that being said, I will open the public hearing on draft ordinance 2022-05, an ordinance amending the Moab Municipal Code R3 and R4 zones with an active employment household requirement at 6:36 p.m. So I think we can see, do we have any other folks in the waiting room now, Corey?
We have not added anybody. So Zoe, Caitlin, and Emily should be the only ones I'm seeing, and they are active in our Zoom right now.
Great. I will first just mention, so far we did receive a public comment from Audrey Graham, who a lot of you know, in support of the proposed ordinance. She says, as a longtime advocate for city and county involvement in quality, locally available workforce housing, she encourages the city of Moab to pursue every avenue to keeping our workforce, our local workforce in the local area. Support the work that's being done. Thank you. So that was Audrey's comment, just to reflect. And there are more comments that we have not yet received via email and via our submission form, just so people aren't worried if we don't mention yours right now. We will absolutely have it in hand soon. Okay, I guess I'll just go with who I can see on my screen first. It looks like Emily's up first. So you have, forgive me, it's been a while since we've done one of these when people showed up. I believe you have 2 minutes.
Right.
And I'll keep an eye on the times. If you just want to introduce yourself and then say your spiel, that'd be great. Welcome, Emily. Thanks for coming.
Hi, thank you. So first of all, I am the chair of the Grand County Planning Commission, but I'm not here speaking on behalf of the Planning Commission. I am coming here to speak on behalf of myself. But I did just want to share a few thoughts, just given the fact that in my capacity and over the last several years, we've looked at similar tools at the county level. And I support this ordinance, and I wanted to share a little bit about why I think it's the right path forward. So first of all, there's no silver bullet to any of these problems. We often talk about the toolbox of options that planners have to work with. This is one tool. I think the distinction between affordable housing and attainable housing is very important, but it's going to take many different solutions and many different tools to ultimately improve this issue locally. So I'm really glad to see the city moving forward. We looked at some similar things related to assured housing, some of the language in the county land use code around high density housing is similar to what you're looking at. One of the things that comes up a lot in our conversations and in conversations I have with people locally is this going to affect, how does this affect developers, especially developers who are local? And there's a lot of concern about, who's carrying the burden. But I think what doesn't often get acknowledged as publicly is that when we don't take action to improve our housing attainability, it really does put sort of a shadow tax on families and businesses in Grand County and in the city. And I think it's even more of an issue in the city, just given the so many jobs are located there in the city, and having access to housing that is nearer to those jobs is so important. People who don't have access to housing nearer to work, every single mile that they have to drive is a cost on their wallet, and the cost of gas is going up. If you don't have access to reliable transportation, or even for those of us with great, maintained cars, stuff happens, it can make you more likely to get late to work or even to have to miss work. It's also has an effect on the employer or the employee, but it also affects the employer and our ability to have reliable, workforce inside of the county and inside of the city. So having reliable housing business community as well. It also serves our kids. When a family has to live farther and farther away from the city center, that makes it less likely that those kids are going to have access to extracurricular activities, childcare, and options like that. You can put the kids at safety at times when a parent unfortunately has to choose between getting to work and having childcare for their kid. And I think that that's something we also need to consider. So I know that y'all are going to be discussing a lot of things related to this today and going into next week. I'm personally really excited about the way this is written. I think there's a further conversation to be had at the city and the county level related to how we look at rental prices. But, I think y'all are making the right step to sort of break off what you can and move this forward. One note I just wanted to share, because it came up in my head when we were looking at something similar, is a lot of times there's when we talk about full-time employment, we don't always consider homemakers as employees, and especially when it comes to separated families, women are often put into positions where they're reliant on a partner for their wage in order to stay, to have a house for their kids and access to that sort of protection. And so I just wanted to just call that out as something that might be worth some discussion, but fully support this. Glad to see the conversation moving forward, and thank you all for your hard work here.
Thank you so much, Emily. Really appreciate the input and the feedback. Okay, next I see Caitlin Myers.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Myers. I'm speaking as an individual, citizen resident of Moab City, but many of you know me as a former employee of the city. I'm really happy to no longer work at the city and be able to speak publicly in support of this ordinance. I'm really proud, especially of Corey, for carrying this forward. But yeah, just wanted to speak in general. I'm the director of the Community Land Trust, and we work really specifically with deed restrictions and with housing that will be perpetually affordable for our community. Not speaking on behalf of the Land Trust, but saying that our mission is really aligned with what the city is proposing here. I'm really stoked to hear the 42.5%. That's a lot higher than what I was expecting. So I think that's amazing. I would echo what Emily said in the context of the land trust deed restrictions. Something that's coming up is homemakers. I think that thinking about the 30 hours a week requirement might take a little bit of fine tuning, because we've had some issues with that for qualifying some of our homeowners for Arroyo Crossing. And I would also just encourage you as a planning commission, I know the push right now is for R3 and R4, but looking at the BAE study, the R2 zone is the third highest gross buildable capacity from the BAE study. I live in the R2. I know that that's where families live when they work in town. And so I would encourage you to consider a similar ordinance or requirement for the R2. Kind of once you get this done, keep going, keep fighting for deed restrictions. I think it's the greatest tool we have to preserve housing for our workforce. So thank you for all your hard work on this.
Thanks, Caitlin. Okay, and last but not least, I see Zoe Houston.
Hey, I'm here on behalf of the Moab Valley Multicultural Center. I'll give you just a quick elevator pitch of what we do. For those of you who don't know, we're a free walk-in community resource center. So anyone from the community can come to us with anything they've got going on and ask for help. And we do our best to work with them or refer them elsewhere if it's something that's beyond our scope. And we do our best to be needs-based. So we address the needs of whoever's walking in the door. And over the last few years, that's pivoted more and more towards housing. In 2019, we got a grant from the state that allows us to kind of formalize our housing services and start keeping track of data. So we know kind of anecdotally what's going on, but we also have some data to back that up. And I'm just pulling up our housing and homelessness case management sheet in front of me right now. In February, we had 105 different people who sought housing services from the Moab Valley Multicultural Center. 90% of those were situational and 10% were chronic. So that means that we have at any given time about 10% of our clients who have been living unsheltered for years and years and years, whatever that reason is. But most of the people we work with are people who are temporarily homeless, which we're using the HUD definition. So that's someone who's living in a place not designated for human habitation. And that's most often because they have lost their housing. Not because they were evicted for, a lease violation or non-payment, but because their housing has been turned into something else where they can't live anymore. Of those 105, 44 were children. And it's about a split, 50%, well, about 50-50 people who are literally homeless. So that's living in a hotel, living in a shed, living outdoors, living in a camper without utilities. And the other half are at imminent risk. So they're going to be homeless in 30 days without some kind of serious intervention. What that looks like in real life, that's a lot of numbers. We have people coming in and calling every single day who are stressed about losing their housing, who are in overcrowded, unsafe situations. And we're an organization that's looking out for the health and well-being of our community. And we know that, kids can't do well in school when they're living in a trailer and don't have access to a shower before school. We know that parents who are working multiple jobs and living out of a hotel, like that's not okay for them. That's not okay for our community. And we know that these are people who are working and who can pay market rent. And they're in these situations because there is nowhere for them to live. Maybe they got a month notice, maybe they got 3 months notice, maybe they got 6 months. But our wait lists right now for apartments are over a year. And as a result, we have, I think the numbers don't even reflect the reality, but we have a lot of working local families who are living in situations that no one should be living in. So I think all that to say, we support anything that's going to create more housing for the people who live here because we care about them and we think that's important. That's all.
Well, thank you so much, Zoe. We really appreciate you and the rest of the folks at MVMC providing input. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I believe we don't have anyone else waiting for the public hearing. Corey, is that correct?
That's correct. We have an empty waiting room, and I think as we close, I see some folks logging off.
If you were here, you are welcome to hop over to YouTube where we are streaming the meeting live, unless you are here for the public hearing. But if you've already spoken, you're off the hook. Thank you. Okay, that said, if we don't have more folks waiting, No more comments that have come in. Again, we will mention and consider all comments we receive via email or via that Google submission form from now well into next week. So please continue to provide feedback, folks, if you haven't yet. All right, I will close this public hearing at 6:47 p.m. And now we can discuss. Great. Corey, anything to say? Any planning commissioners? Now's a good time for questions. You know, we have the benefit of not actually having to vote on this yet tonight. That comes next week. So we can definitely use this time for questions, particularly to Nate, who is joining us here.
I'll just say I like the 42.5 much better than the 33. I still wish we could round up, but I guess we got to take what we can get.
Yeah, and then I mean, I think the 42.5, at least what Corey was saying, that is the exact number that came exactly out of the database research that BAE did for this. So hopefully it makes a lot of sense. It's based in hard data, and hopefully can be bolstered by that. But yeah, it's definitely a good percentage. I think it was good to hear that people are happy that it's something that's meaningful. I think particularly when you start getting into much more units, it's really going to make a big difference and hopefully not really be more than a drop in the bucket for developers. I think hopefully the benefits outweigh the costs, certainly to the community, but hopefully it'll work out for in folks' favor too financially. So yeah, I agree completely. And I'm happy that it is exactly what's from the research that we have done. I think it's important that we do that the public not feel like we're just sort of arbitrarily pulling numbers out of the ether either. So yeah. Any other questions, comments, anything? Yeah, Corey, I'm curious if there's a way to rework the definition of active employment household. I think the fact that both Emily and Caitlin mentioned that it seems like, at least at the county level, where they're implementing a similar definition for some things, that homemakers, stay-at-home parents who are very clearly a full-time resident of Grand County, but who might not have that 30-hour-a-week qualification or be physically or legally disabled, might be falling through the cracks. And I certainly don't want that to happen with this, because there are a lot of families who that would apply to them, I think.
I think in that, what we had attempted to do, just in a quick response to that, is in that number 4 definition of active employment households is a person who is unable to work or does not have a work history required in the subsections of this due to a disability or defined by state and federal Fair Housing Acts and the American with Disabilities Act and other applicable state or federal laws. So I think there are some standards within that may apply, and Nate can check me, to maybe some of those situations, maybe not all. But I think if it's a stay-at-home parent who's residing full-time in Moab, they would likely fall under some classification of that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking.
We'll check into that and then maybe see what the response is. That
trying to think of an example, like say there's a parent who for all intents and purposes works less than 30 hours a week, stays home with the family, and maybe the other parent is a trucker, like a long haul trucker or something, who really isn't physically present in Grand County a lot and maybe is being paid by an outside source, but the family's been here, the kids are in the schools. I mean, locals by all definition otherwise. Right. I want to make sure that those folks wouldn't have trouble qualifying under what we're doing.
Perfect. I think that's an edit we can certainly take, hopefully in the next week, bring it back before you and have some sort of answer to scenarios like that. And if not, if we can't, it doesn't mean that we wouldn't be able to approve this and then come back and amend that language in a pretty expedited way.
Yeah, that's good, considering we are on a timeline for passing the ordinance. It's good to know that we could do that. But if that's flagged, I mean, if Caitlin Myers, if you're still listening, if you have something that the land trust has worked out that would sort of encompass that, we would be really happy to take your input and your suggestions. If you want to email or contact city planning in some way, because we can work together if we're all trying to figure out the same answer to the same problem.
Under that exact same thought, I had a conversation with somebody that I went to school with, and them going away, graduating from college, and then coming back and then working remotely. Is that fits in that same spot of, if they don't live with family, but they're interested in living one of these spaces, and that's what's available. I think that's something that came up at a city council meeting at some point, but I don't remember
I
some of
think
the answers were.
if you look at the ordinance, there actually is a bit stricter restriction on remote working, where, say, you're a contractor or a consultant, we really are aiming for people who sort of have their economic base in Grand County as well. So I think it says like 75% of your clients for your billable hours, whatever that might be, have like a place of business. I think it Grand or San Juan.
It is. I do remember it is 70
Yeah. So
in Grand County, actually. So not even San Juan.
okay. And that might be worth looking at too, just because our county line is in such a wonky place where so much of people who are Moabites live in San Juan County. But yeah, I think, for this, and I like, that's a really good question, Ruben, and thanks. I wanted to mention that for everybody. It really does aim to get, we have a lot of remote workers who have come and joined our community just in the last 2 years alone with the pandemic, which is wonderful. But we also want to make sure that we're helping support people who are making Grand County wages in Grand County housing, rather than people who are making San Francisco wages in Grand County. Because I feel like you just have a leg up.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I guess initially I think of the people that graduated from, Grand County, went off, came back, but it is more so for the workforce.
Yeah.
And for the people who are supporting it itself.
For sure. And I think there'll be, the more of these kind of things that we do in the future, hopefully the more we'll sort of chip away at those gaps that we're trying to account for. And that does seem like one, because I know several folks that fit into exactly what you were saying, Ruben.
And then the rounding down, you said that was just that made it easier. And then you also had a chart that pulled up Corey. But I haven't seen that anywhere else.
The chart has not been published, as we didn't have noticing time to get any of that material out. This presentation period is really the best way to get it publicly out. And this was more of a presentation material than an actual official document. So it was more just a reference scale as you're thinking about, well, what does this mean for a project of a certain size? How many is that actually going to yield? This is just kind of quick reference on, 1 through 10, and then some interval type numbers. But anybody, if you take your calculator out and there's a development of a certain size, you just will take that number and incorporate that 42.5, and you'll have what that number is. Compensation for rounding down is, I think, to best consolidate those increments of decimals so that they're represented in a way that is, I think, maintaining in a justifiable realm.
I found it odd. Yeah, I found it back on YouTube. It is.
Okay.
Any other questions or discussion, particularly for Nate, who's here, who can enlighten us about all the sort of legal ins and outs of what we're contemplating right now, or comments, reflections on anything anyone in the public said? Jeremy, Jill, Luke, you're welcome to go ahead and use this time to ask questions, because this will be in front of you not very long from now. So.
No, it's pretty clear to me. I really do like the 42%. I think that's huge. I see a lot of single parents at school that could really benefit from this, knowing that they might have something. I do like the idea of something about like a single parent that does work only maybe less than 30 hours because they're receiving, financial support from somebody else as part of a a divorce decree or something. But that I like that we could look at it later as well. But I do like this.
Yes, as a recent addition to the Planning Commission. This is, my introduction to this document just in the past couple of weeks, and it seems like a tremendous amount of work has gone into it. I really appreciate the feedback from the public and from folks representing or not representing institutions in town. That support means a lot at this point. So I don't have any questions at this time. I want to point something out very briefly and very minuscule, but under the enforcement section 1I1, right at the end of that paragraph, is not occupied by AN. It should be not and AEH, just a small grammatical piece. That's the only one that I found reading through it.
It was say the section again, Jeremy, for me. I'll add
Yeah, sure. Enforcement 1 violation, then I, and then 1 again in parentheses right at the end of that paragraph.
Oh, by Anne. Perfect. Thank you. I found it.
That's it. So thank you, everyone.
I'm sure that's appreciated, Jeremy. When you've read a document so many times, you just stop reading it. We've all been there.
Yep.
As we're talking about edits quickly, I have incorporated the Grand County and San Juan component in. I think that's a reasonable accommodation given our proximity of Valley to encompass really what we're assessing. So
Yeah, because oh my
if
God,
that seems in the direction the commission would like to go, I'll keep that edit.
like someone could be working at the San Juan Clinic,
Right.
Who
Right.
lives a block away.
I thought we were going with the like turf war mentality, so that helps.
Give us back our South Valley.
Well,
We never had it, I suppose, but
if we can get it.
no, I don't think that'll ever happen. But anything else from planning commissioners? Nate, we made this really easy on you, man. Sorry.
I get grilled with questions in other contexts. Sometimes it's not a bad thing to have no questions. I do have one comment that might reduce some of the heartburn with the rounding issue, if the commission would be interested in hearing that.
Yeah, please.
From a purely litigation standpoint, and Rob and I are land use lawyers, but we're also litigators who defend municipalities in an exaction or land use context all the time. It is much more defensible to defend something that's rounded down within the study parameter than something that exceeds a study parameter. And so in some respects, the city is protecting itself by having a round down provision. I don't know if that's helpful to all of you or not, but at least I said something during the meeting. So
I think
but
that's very helpful. Yes.
I am happy to answer any questions, especially about that disability provision, and happy to be helpful in any way to both Corey and the commission.
Yeah, and I know this is not your job to write code, it's to review it after it's written, but if you can think of examples, that's something that we're trying to do with sort of the less than 30-hour a week, local person who clearly fits the intent of the ordinance, but might slip through the cracks in the sort of legal nitty-gritty as it's written now. We would absolutely be welcome to share that with us or with Corey as we're finalizing things in this next week here.
Yeah, and I can work with Corey on that language, whatever the commission directs. From my perspective, it's tragic to hear those numbers about how many families are struggling to find attainable housing in the city of Moab. And I think that it is a very real problem facing especially families who may be in different circumstances, stay-at-home parent. The question in my mind, though, that the commission may want to consider during this meeting and next meeting as well is, what's the purpose of this ordinance? Really, the purpose of this ordinance is to provide housing for local workers. And to some extent, the study is predicated on that assumption and that purpose. And so while I think that that is a real public policy concern, from a purely litigation standpoint, the question that I had when we were discussing that is, well, is that really a part of the data that we were looking at and what we were trying to address, the specific problem that was trying to be addressed? The disability provision that is included in the proposed ordinance is really designed to address a different problem, which is to protect the city of Moab from a claim arising under the Fair Housing Act, because it's adopted an ordinance that results in discriminatory treatment of a protected class. And so I see that provision as being slightly different, as somebody who defends Fair Housing Act claims all the time. And I do recognize it's a really, really big problem, but I think that if the commission was to revisit that issue, it would want to take a hard look at that study and also the whereas clauses to make sure it's internally consistent with its purpose.
Thanks so much, Nate. That's actually a really good point. I hadn't, we were all making these connections, but I hadn't, you're absolutely right, where the study supports the ordinance, the whereas is specifically the findings of the city and what we specifically need out of this should all be tied together really closely and neatly. And that if we do add a provision in for a group of folks who absolutely do need housing in town, no one's arguing that, but the scope of this particular ordinance and what supports it might strain the bounds of that a little bit. I think that's thank you for that feedback. It's not something I thought of yet.
Sorry, Chair, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go for it. Oh my gosh.
but I'm happy to work with Corey to revisit that issue and see if we can get language that's consistent with its purpose for the commission to consider. This is just my opportunity to address all of you, and I wanted to raise that point.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd welcome other commissioners what your thoughts are about that. I think I'm fine proceeding forward with it as written, just understanding that, but I'm also a lawyer and I want to be really cognizant of that kind of stuff, just like, Nate does. But, if it isn't too much more trouble, maybe to try to figure out a way we can absolutely stay within the purpose of this specific ordinance and the data that supports it, while trying to account for maybe those folks that are slipping through the crack that we'd like to cover. Other commissioners are welcome to express that, and we can request that the staff work on that within the next week with Nate and his folks.
I think as long as we stay within our deadlines, it's okay to look at, but I think we have to remember that this is just one tool in a multi-tool kit that we're hoping to, I do think we should take a hard look at the R2 and other zones once we get this done, and implement multiple tools, not just this one.
Yeah, and I'll echo that too, Jess. So I think that's just another reason we're realizing that there's no, we've known and we've said a lot that there's no silver bullet. It's just another example of a way that one ordinance that covers something is going to inherently miss something else, and we're going to need to pivot and address that in a different way, whatever works in that circumstance. Jill, Ruben, Jeremy, anybody else have any questions for Nate, comment, anything like that while we have him here?
Nothing specifically pertaining to you, Nate. I might have some other things if other commissioners want to go around.
I might quickly intervene. Summer Johnson is on the Zoom call now. We have an update about the public comments that we have them now. So Summer, if you want to address that.
Sure. Sorry, I had my other phone out, so I apologize for popping in so late. Corey had sent me a message, and we did receive 3 comments using the form. All 3 of those were in support. One was from, I believe, Sam Van Wetter, McKenna Barkley, and Caitlin Myers. I did send those to you via email, and I did put them in a shared drive that I haven't actually shared yet, so I will get to that. But you guys should have all of those via email so you can review them. But the essence of all 3 appeared to be in support of the ordinance.
Great, thanks, Summer. And if commissioners want to take a second to look at that, if you have any comments or questions about those, you're welcome to as well. I'm noticing I'm reading the comment right now from McKenna Barkley. It echoes what a lot of folks have said. But she just does specifically mention the fact that it's set aside for locally active employed individuals within our community, which she says is an important distinction given the surge in remote working that the community has seen. So kind of addressing on, what your question was, Ruben. Ruben, yeah, you said you had other comments or questions. Go for it whenever you're ready.
So that was just regarding the 42.5. As we give ourselves this percentage and we say, I know that we can look at the other developments are currently going through the pipeline and how many units that's going to give us. But past that, what are we giving ourselves with that 42.5? Are we giving ourselves, and I guess I could look through the numbers a bit better and spend more time with them, but just any thoughts off the top for you, Corey?
Is that in context of the quantity we think we might be getting based on conceptual plans coming through?
Yeah.
I might have to spend time because again, this is my general numbers. I'm thinking citywide, and typically that's how we have communicated in the past. This is only identifying a particular use in 2 particular zones. So it would be likely, I mean, a lot of the development is going on in these 2 zones, but some of the larger builds are going on in commercial zones because the way those are structured. So I could spend some time and maybe touch on that on Tuesday if you wish.
I'll spend some time with it too, and I can, if I come up with anything specifically on Tuesday, we'll be fine.
Nate is raising his hand. Nate.
So I just add that when you're looking at the BAE study, and Corey knows it much better than I do, and so just stop me, Corey, if I step out of bounds. But what that study assumes is full build out at an existing percentage. So I would just caution when the commissioners are looking at that, that's not going to exactly tell you, that study won't tell you exactly the number of units that you'll achieve. Is that fair, Corey?
That's accurate, because again, we had to utilize existing data, use build out data, collaborate that within a net value, which is how that determination formulation was made. But what we might be able to talk to Ruben about is, I'm saying maybe projects that we know are on the horizon of proposals. So we can give you more of an immediate, I'd say in the next 2-3 years, conceptual number, something like that. But as far as citywide, again, like Nate's saying, that's a full build out and a scale percentage. But of course it's variable on the community.
Okay. I guess that was kind of the question. This is a number we can be comfortable with for the next 5 years, 3 years.
Right. And that's
realizing it's not the only thing. And it's just for these 2 zones, which has been mentioned by a lot of folks, the R2 and then several commercial zones are a majority of our land in Grand County, or excuse me, in Moab City, at least. I don't know about Grand County. I imagine it's similar, plus a bunch of agricultural zones, but just making sure that
You're right.
So Corey, what you're saying is that it's so full build out are the numbers we have. So that would be, say you have a lot where you could put 10 units on it according to the underlying zoning. This is the numbers as if you put 10 units on it, and then that percentage requirement of that would be what, 3 out of 10 would be, yeah.
It will, out of 10, it'd be 4.
But it's
I'm at 4 point.
Oh, you're right. That's
Anything below 10 is 3 units. Basically, it's 3 and then goes to 2 and then goes to 1. But I think
but it's not, I would say it's accounting the numbers that we have, the full build out, it would be as if 10 were going to get built when it might be 6 or it might be 4.
Data isn't drafted exactly right because we have properties that are existing and we've established that they are there.
Yeah.
We've then created the net data based on the vacant area that has not built, and then collaborate on areas that are prone for redevelopment.
Okay, great.
So the formulation data is not going to give us the referencing numbers I think Ruben's looking for. We're going to have to use subjective application to give, I think, practical numbers. So what this is saying is, as the city builds out as a whole, there is an inherent need for workforce housing based on established parameters. So we create an understanding of every time anything builds out from that. So we're starting now, we're not talking about what had been pre-existing, but starting now to full build out, full capacity, and where we're at in the middle of net, how those 2 things work together. that trajectory, this 42% is what is supported by the data. So asking anything over that would likely be in excess of what the data currently shows. It doesn't mean that we could get there with changes of community, but that's not what the data supports exactly. Going under that means we'd be insufficiently supporting the data supported workforce need. So that 42, which is exactly why we took exactly what was in the study, is the number that is defensible. So yeah, long-winded answer, but yeah. So as far as the numbers we're going to see in the next 3 years, we can subjectively apply those to the projects we have in our pocket.
I'd be curious about that.
Yeah, that are drafting up, and we can come up with that based. We've all seen that scale of kind of the approved, proposed, and conceptual projects. So we'll take that same scale and then show how many are on the horizon, which is usually about a 3-year timeline.
I think that'd be nice just to be able to show for the community when we're having these discussions. I think it's a cool tidbit to know. I think people like to see some concrete positive change, if you will. Nate, do you have another comment?
I just add that this approach that BAE used is very similar to like an impact fee analysis, right? Where you have to make assumptions and projections, and what they were really trying to do is figure out a percentage over time as you reach full build out, how you can maintain. And so the numbers of units created immediately might be lower than what you would achieve over time. But the idea is to have a percentage that ultimately does a lot of good if the goal is attainable housing.
Thank you. It's a good explanation. Anyone else have comments, questions, anything like that? We are not going to be voting to recommend or not recommend this ordinance tonight. Just as a reminder, we'll be doing that, Corey, on Tuesday, correct? Extra important, as always, we know it's a special meeting, not at a normal meeting time, not even on the same week we normally meet, but it's really important for us to all be there to have a quorum to be able to recommend whatever we have in front of us that we agree on to City Council if we want to. So please and thank you to everyone for attending that meeting, and it will be attendance in person at City Hall.
I have the start time still at 6 p.m. Is that consistently acceptable for the commission?
I want to just make sure we have at least 4 people who can for sure be there.
I will be there.
Okay, awesome.
I'll be there.
Hopefully Jesso can get, Jesso will be out of town, but we're going to see what opportunities there might be. So we'll ensure we have quorum.
Great. I will even volunteer to like man the laptop with Jesso on it if we need to, because I think your input is valuable. Okay, I think with that, again, thank you to everyone who provided comments either electronically or in person on Zoom here. We really appreciate you and your patience listening to the background and everything too. Or Nate, is that an old hand or a new hand up there?
That is technological ineptitude.
Okay. I don't even bother to use the hand raise function for that very reason. So great. Just wanted to check. Great. Thank you for the public hearing, everyone, and your feedback and questions. We'll continue this work into next week, hopefully getting things sent off to City Council on Tuesday. Other than that, Corey, what future agenda items do we have?
Well, immediate future, this one, of course, for recommendation, obviously. But following that into our April meetings, there is some potential we may be seeing the site plan for one of the projects in which we're discussing, which would be the city center townhomes. I think they're attempting to complete their comments in time for that meeting. And if not that meeting, immediately following that second meeting of April. And as I'm looking through our project list, I'm not seeing anything that is on deck, but we do have a longer break between meetings now. So something may come through DRT in time. So I'm going to leave it at that, those are our pending items at this point.
Great. Anything else from anyone? Any comments before we adjourn for the evening? Thank you again for making time for this very important thing. We really appreciate it, and for all your great conversation, everybody. And Corey, thanks for being 5 different jobs.
Well, I'm down to 3 now.
All right.
Thank
you, Jessica.
And I've got 3. But Anna Anglin, our hired zoning administrator, we've actually met with her. She came down and is working on trying to find attainable housing. So even at a staff position in which the zoning administrator is, she's having incredible difficulty finding any housing. So she has one particular lead, which we're enthusiastic for her about, but it may not be, well, it may not fall through. So hopefully Anna can get down here. She was planning to be down here. And I think it had gotten pushed to maybe May at this point because of the housing situation, but we're going to keep trying with Anna. But if, eventually it's not working, we'll understand. And we've been down that road with 2 other planning assistants and other, so it's trying to get them down. So thank goodness Jessica is here. Jessica, is there anything staff wise that I'm forgetting?
Not that I can think of. You guys were pretty thorough on everything.
I might have one more proposal. And that being the proposal for a lower percentage if a certain square footage of wall space or exterior wall is allocated towards stained glass.
I'll put that to the council.
Okay.
If nothing else,
something on Tuesday might be nice.
Those of you who aren't new, Ruben is Moab's biggest champion of stained glass in community architecture.
I think it would look good.
It would. We have some beautiful sunlight. Jill's on board.
Yeah, I'll see what Nate's defensibility report would be on that and see how that.
Yeah, we might need to study. We might need to study to.
Well, I'll tell Ruben I'm a big fan. So,
Hey, we can argue that it'll create more jobs in the community.
There you go. That's right.
If we want to create some artisan shops, stained glass is pretty cool.
We have enough jobs. That's
enough jobs
for the workers.
I'd like to just diversify. I don't want to work in a restaurant or guide.
There you go. Don't tell the restaurant that you work for. All right. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. And we will see you by 6 p.m. At City Hall in the chambers. For those who have never set foot there as a planning commissioner, it'll be exciting. At 6 p.m. on Tuesday, the 29th, for our continuation of public comment about this particular issue, and then an action item on a recommendation to City Council about it. Thanks, everyone. I adjourn this meeting at 7:20 p.m.
Thanks.